time together. We use the word miracle pretty loosely these days. Usually we use it in a way just to describe something that was unusual, odd, unexpected. In 1980, the U.S. hockey team defeated the Russians in the prelims of the Olympics. And they went on, therefore, to win the gold medal for the Olympics in that year. Now, that's before many of you were born. So let me just set this stage for you, okay? The Russians were four-time defending Olympic champions. They had won 5 of the previous 6 Olympics in ice hockey. They had not lost Olympic hockey game. This was in 1980. They had not lost one since 1968. That's how long their reign had been. And their team was made up of primarily professional, seasoned, experienced hockey players. Contrast to that, the U.S. team was made up primarily of amateurs from colleges across the nation. It was the youngest Olympic hockey team ever to that date and time. And days earlier, in an exhibition game before the Olympics really got going, the U.S. team lost to the Russians 10-3. If you know hockey, you know, that's not a good sign, okay? So, although Russia led most of the game, in the last few minutes of the game, the American team scored 2 goals. And down to the wire in the last few seconds, the game ended with the score of 4-3. The American hockey team won. Al Michaels, who was the announcer today, shouted out, "Do you believe in miracles?" "Yes!" And the crowds were going wild about that. Now, if you are of a certain age, you remember that event and the excitement that was around it. But if you don't remember it, go watch the movie, all right? Because it was literally called, and to this day, called the Miracle on Ice. And I think sometimes when we think about miracles, we think of things like that. Things that are surprising, an exhilarating outcome, things that seem beyond belief, but they're still within the realm of possibility. They're just, beyond our ability to even imagine. When we talk about miracles from Scripture, we're talking about a different animal altogether. We're talking about events that transcend the ordinary laws of nature. We're talking about things that can only be explained if the Creator God was the one orchestrating those things to happen. In Scripture, there's a lot of different words. In the New Testament, there's a lot of different words that are used for miracle. Some of them talk about, great powerful acts or wonders that people are in awe of. But the Apostle John, when he writes his gospel, he uses one word predominantly when he talks about miracles. And it is the word, in your English translations, it is the word that's translated signs. And John's preference for that term is because John wrote his gospel to people a generation separated from God, from the life of Jesus, and he was hoping to give them reasons to believe, evidence that they could trust and put their faith in order to believe that Jesus was truly the Messiah, the Son of God. And for John, miracles were one of his great signs, one of the great testimonials about what Jesus had done and who he was. John records 7 big miracles in his gospel. Some others record more miracles than that. John focuses on 7 miracles. And some of these miracles talk about through Jesus, God's power over nature. Like when Jesus walks on the water. That was an amazing miracle to witness. When we were in Israel years ago, we got out on a boat on the Sea of Galilee. And it was just a little eerie to think about that it was on this same body of water that Jesus walked across the water. I was in a boat, sustained by the structure of the boat, but Jesus walked across that water. Some of the miracles that John includes talk about God's power over sickness or disease, like when he healed a man who had been crippled for 38 years. And of course, the final miracle that John talks about, when he raises Lazarus from the dead, gives real hope to us that there's something in the power of Jesus that conquered death in Lazarus and is also able to conquer death for us as well. What a powerful testimony for us. But the most intriguing miracle, I think, in the whole Gospel of John is recorded in John chapter 9. It takes up the whole chapter of John chapter 9. But the miracle itself just takes up 2 verses out of that chapter. But it's the hoopla around it. It is all the other verses that talk about the investigation of that miracle and the interrogations that went on about that miracle. And then the eyewitness testimony that was shared about that miracle that really elevates this miracle in the minds of modern people, because we are all about the evidence. We've been reared in a CSI world environment, right? Where we have to have DNA and fingerprints and all these things before we can adjudicate a trial. And really that's what we're doing today. We're making a decision about who Jesus was and the role he's going to play in our lives. And John says this particular miracle has great power in helping you make that decision. So the story begins in chapter 9 that Jesus and his fellow disciples were walking along, and they came across this man who had been blind from the time he was born. It led to another discussion we're not going to get into, where the apostle says, who sinned that this man was born blind, he or his parents? But Jesus' conclusion was this man was born blind for this particular moment, so that God's glory could be revealed. That kind of makes you pause for a moment when you think about why tough and painful situations happen in our lives. Maybe some of those have happened for a particular moment in time where God could display his glory in your life. Anyway, Jesus then stooped down beside the man. He got some dirt from the ground, and he spat on it, and he made some mud from that dirt, and he put it on the man's eyes, and he told him to go wash in the pool of Siloam. And the man did what he told him to do. He went to the pool, he washed the cake-on mud off of his eyes, and suddenly, for the first time in his life, this man could see all that was going on around him. I mean, that is if you hung around church too much, you really don't grasp how amazing that is. In fact, in any other circle, it would be unbelievable. You would just say, this has to be made up. I mean, no one who is born blind can suddenly see again because he got dirt in his face. But it's important for us to remember a few things here, because this is a Matlock moment for us, okay? It's important for us to remember some certain things here. First of all, this man's blindness was confirmed. You may be thinking, oh, he probably faked this. This was a plant out in the audience. This man's blindness was confirmed. In fact, it was his neighbors and his friends who saw him walking around seeing things, and he says, wait a minute, this is the guy that lives down the street. This is the one who's been begging for alms the whole time because he couldn't see. I've known him for years, and he was unable to see, and now he's seen. His blindness was confirmed. The second thing is this. We know that somehow he regained his sight. In fact, some of his friends who said, hey, that's the guy who sits over here begging every day. Some other people said, no, that can't be him. That can't be him. This guy's seeing. That guy is blind. It must be his twin brother. That can't be him. But the guy says, no, it's really me. I'm the guy that you saw every day begging for alms over here, and I can see now. So it's confirmed that he was blind and that now he can see. And one other thing that we may not think about is this. We receive that story and we read it in our Bibles because it is passed on to us by someone who was there and saw it happen and wrote it down. Remember when we first began this story, when Jesus was walking along and saw the blind man, who was he walking with? You can speak up. His disciples, walking with it. Who is one of his disciples? John was one of his disciples. John was the one standing right there by Jesus when they were having the conversation about why this man was born blind. He was the one that looked at Jesus as he knelt down and made mud from the dirt and placed it on his eyes and sent him off. And he was the one later on who saw this man seeing again. He was witness to this whole thing. So it makes us ask the question, how did such a supernatural event occur? How can a man who was born unseen with a birth defect now see perfectly well? Well, that question was asked of this man. How can you do this? And here's what his answer was. The man named Jesus did it. That's all he knew. That's the sum total of his understanding about this whole process. Remember, this man was blind when Jesus met him and put mud on his eyes. It was only after he left Jesus that he regained his sight. He couldn't have pointed Jesus out in a crowd, probably, because he had never seen him before. Definitely never seen him before. All I know is this man who is named Jesus did this for me. That's when the Pharisees began to get involved. Something so unbelievable happens, somebody's got to adjudicate this. And the Pharisees were the ones who stepped in. And so they began to ask him about what went on. He says, all I know is this. He put mud on my eyes, I washed, and now I see again. But the problem was that this had happened on the Sabbath day. And the Pharisees had a strict understanding of what things could happen on the Sabbath and what couldn't happen on the Sabbath. And certainly putting mud on someone's eyes and washing in the pool and giving them sight again is something that could not legally, righteously happen on the Sabbath. And so the Pharisees said, well, one thing we know about this man, he is not from God. Any God-fearing man would never do something like this on the Sabbath day. So tell us, how can such a sinner do something like this, something so powerful as this? What do you think about this man? Earlier, this blind man could only say, a man named Jesus did this for me. But now he says this, forced into this conundrum, how could an evil man now do something very holy and good and righteous? And he says this, all I know is this, he must be a prophet. He must be a good and holy and righteous man. It's interesting to watch the progression in this story of this man coming to an understanding of who Jesus is. He was just a man to begin with, and now he's something more than just a man. He's a prophet. He's a man of God. But now we have other questions to deal with. The Pharisees subpoenaed the man's parents, brought him in for questioning. You know what? When we're faced with making sense of Jesus and his miracles, that can be a comforting thing for us, but for many people it can be a frightening thing, an unnerving thing, because it forces us to make decisions about Jesus that we're not ready to make, that he is more than just a good man, more than just a human being, more than just a prophet. He's something other than all that. The Pharisees asked his parents, tell us how all this happened. Was this son of yours really born blind? Tell us how he got his sight. And they were fearful about being kicked out of the synagogue for giving the wrong answers. And so their answer is this. All we know is this. This is our son. He was born blind, and now he can see. But how he got that way and who did it, we don't have a clue. Don't ask us any more questions. That sounds like a pretty political answer, doesn't it? I do not recall, okay? This was their reply. All we know is he is our son. He was blind. He's obviously seeing again now. We don't know how any of this happened. The historical evidence for Jesus being a first century rabbi is, in this day and age, undeniable. I mean, there are people who may claim that Jesus is just a fictitious character, but anybody who knows the data, anybody who researches history, both biblical and extra-biblical history, even skeptics of the deity of Jesus, they will all agree there was a first century rabbi named Jesus living in Israel in the first century. Where they stutter is when they're forced to contemplate whether this Jesus came with the power that God provides. But like the man born blind, we have to face those facts ourselves. The Pharisee said, "We know this man's a sinner." The man born blind says, "I don't know about those deep theological questions, sinner or not. I just know this. I was blind, and now I see." I mean, you've got to make sense of that. So the religious leaders pulled out another argument. They just started insulting the man. You can usually tell when someone is losing an argument by when they start throwing out insults, you know? And so they said things like, "You are a sinner." He says, you are someone who we will not respect and listen to any longer. In fact, at the end of the day, they just said, "Get out of here. We're not going to just have this discussion any longer." But this man has this ongoing progression of faith. He says, at first, this is a man named Jesus. Now he's saying he's a prophet from God. Next, he's saying, look, if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. There is a power within him that is beyond his own ability. He's not just human. He's not just a good man. He's not just a prophet. He's something else. Those are the same questions that people contemplate today. People start thinking Jesus was just a man. They acquiesce, say Jesus was a good man. Some may say that he was a messenger from God, that he was God's good man. But the question still lingers out there. How can a human being affect that kind of change in the life of a man? Here's the climax. They've cast this now seeing blind man out of the synagogue. He's ostracized from his community, from his family, from his friends. I don't know where he is in town, but he's all alone, and Jesus comes up to him again. Now remember, it's very likely that this blind man does not recognize Jesus, correct? Because the last time he saw him, he did not see him, right? So Jesus comes up and he asks him this peculiar question. He says, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" That is Jesus' favorite description of himself. And a lot of the impact of that is that Jesus is owning his humanity. He's saying, "I am a son of humanity. My mother was human. My family is human. I am of this earth." But for the Jews of the first century, Son of Man carried a much more powerful message. It harkens back to the book of Daniel, where Daniel refers to the coming of someone like the Son of Man. And Daniel wrote during an era when the Jews were in captivity and they were longing to be rescued from the Babylonian overlords. And they were reading the book of Daniel, who promised one who would come like the Son of Man and bring them rescue and redemption. And for the modern Jews of Jesus' day, they felt they were living in very similar times, because the Romans were now their overlords, and they were looking for a God who would come and rescue them. And so they read the book of Daniel with great intensity and focus, because they were looking forward to when this one would come and rescue them from what God had, from what was oppressing them, and to give them what God had promised. And so when Jesus says, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" This now seeing blind man heard something much different from Jesus being human. He understood that Jesus was saying, "Do you believe in the promised coming Messiah?" And he also meant something else more important than that. Let me read a section from Daniel for you that talks about the Son of Man. Daniel chapter 7, verse 13 and 14, here's what the prophet says. "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. And he approached the Ancient of Days, God himself, and was led into his presence. And he was given authority and glory and sovereign power. And all nations and people of every language worshiped him. And his dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom will never be destroyed." We're just not talking about an earthly Messiah or a political leader or a religious leader. We're talking about somebody who was coming with the God-given authority and glory and sovereign power that only God could provide. So when this man comes up and Jesus says, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" This blind man understood him to mean, do you believe in God's authority and his righteous ruler coming to free us from all that condemns us? And the formerly blind man then says, "Who is he, sir, that I might believe in him?" And Jesus says this, "You have now seen him, and in fact, he is the one speaking to you." At that, this one who was blind from birth and now can see again says, "Lord, I believe." And he bows down and he worships at his feet. By calling him Lord, this healed man is recognizing the authority of Jesus in his life. By worshiping him, he's recognizing his divinity, his otherworldly nature. It's interesting that John picks up on this theme of blindness and sight. Throughout his whole gospel, this kind of rattles around in his writings. We live in a world that we demand CSI level evidence. But there's something within us that listens to the story of Jesus, the story of his miraculous healings, of his walking on the water, bringing dead people back to life again. There's something in us when we hear those things, we think, those can't be true. I mean, things don't happen like that. And I would agree with you were it not for this one point. The only being capable of suddenly suspending the laws of nature is the divine being that created them in the first place. And that's why John says these great supernatural acts of walking across water, of bringing dead people to life again, of turning a few fish and loaves of bread into a feast to feed thousands, this great ability that boggles our understanding of how the laws of nature work are signs that Jesus is not just a man, not just a good man, not just God's good man, but that Jesus is God in human form. And you know, that's a good lesson for us to remind ourselves of. I mean, we are separated from those events by 2,000 years, by 6,000 miles across the globe to Israel. But even people in St. Louis need to come to grips with this historical fact. There was a man who was born blind, who met Jesus, and through the power of God in him was able to see again. In fact, John says this: Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you might believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you might have life in his name. May the testimony of those eyewitnesses remind us, draw out of us the strong belief that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing we might experience true life that he promised. Let's stand and sing this song together.